Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett. Here's your latest update for October 14th. How has red tide changed after Hurricane Michael? Here's a look at the latest satellite, which is an excellent way to observe how red tide is changing. So where I've outlined in the orange color here, you can see where I can kind of make out the brown murky color of red tide, and that's about 15 miles wide offshore of parts of Anna Maria Island, offshore of the Pinellas County area, and especially dark and brown murky color a couple of miles offshore of Clearwater Beach and Honeymoon Island area. And again, that's maybe 8 miles offshore of Clearwater Beach, but especially dense in this highlighted red area. Looking farther south, again, a bloom that's about 30 miles wide offshore of the Sanibel and Fort Myers area, an especially dense area, again highlighted in the red color here. This entire bloom is about 30 miles wide. Looking up in the Sarasota and Venice area, it actually appeared that with the easterly winds prior to the hurricane, the conditions were really improving, and it doesn't look like the hurricane really disrupted that too much, at least at the moment, with only sporadic areas of more concentrated red tide. So let's hope it continues to improve in this area. Now, comparing that to pre-hurricane, this isn't the greatest satellite image. I had a kind of a tough time getting a good image because of all the clouds leading up to the hurricane, but you can basically look at the orange color here and see the highlighted area. So we still have the bloom offshore Pinellas County. Unfortunately, my theory that some of the red tide could have been drug up from the north because of those southwest currents associated with the hurricane. That does appear to be true because, again, we're looking at a area of really dense concentration offshore Pinellas County. And again, this bloom width really hasn't changed much, about 15 to 17 miles wide. It does appear that, again, the area around Sarasota and Venice has remained about the same after the hurricane, maybe even slightly improving just a tiny bit. This area offshore Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel, it actually has shrunk about 30 miles. So now we're looking at a width that's about 30 miles wide. Still an incredibly wide area of red tide right here where the Caloosahatchee and the Lake Okeechobee empty out into the Gulf of Mexico, but it is about 20 miles less wide than it was prior to the hurricane. Regardless, so we do have a very dense bloom here that's indicated in the reddish color here. So here's a map that came out on Friday, October 12th, and it's kind of misleading from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and not really blaming them. I'm perhaps blaming some of the reporters that are interpreting these maps for not looking into them in a bit more detail. But look at this right here. This map has water samples taken from 10/4 to 10/11, and the hurricane was on 10/10. Well, I looked in a bit more detail. There are about 80 different water samples up and down the coast that are being shown on this map here. Well, guess what? Only about 2 of these were actually taken after the hurricane. So the water was churned up like a blender. All these conditions have changed. So this map is kind of garbage because it doesn't really show us what is happening after the hurricane or what is happening as of today, because all of this may have changed. And the same thing with this map here that shows you the concentration changes. Again, I'm not saying that conditions are necessarily worse in Charlotte or Lee. All these could be the same as what's represented on the map. What I'm saying is that these water samples were taken pre-hurricane. So what a lot of journalists are doing, local and national, they're actually going online, seeing that map, and they're posting articles like this saying that after the hurricane moved through the Gulf of Mexico, red tide might be on its way out. According to the latest update, 5 of the 9 samples taken in Manatee County reported K-Brev algae bloom was not present. 4 other samples showed background or very low or low traces of red tide, and those results account for 5 to 25% decrease. So this person is actually referencing these graphics here, which again are not really a good reference point for what's happening after the hurricane, being these water samples were taken before the hurricane. So just wanted to share that some of the articles you might be reading may not be the most precise or as precise as they could be. Now here's a map though taken and shared by my buddy Scott Shapiro, who was out there with his volunteers taking water samples up and down the coast of Pinellas County. And unfortunately you can see the conditions after the hurricane have gotten worse at area beaches of Pinellas County, and you can see a lot of orange and red dots representing medium to high concentrations. And speaking of Scott, he said out there taking these samples, you can smell, you can just smell the red tide and the dead fish in the air more than you could before the hurricane. And the water has a bit more discoloration as well. And with his actual electron microscope samples, he can tell you that, yeah, the conditions have gotten a little bit worse for Pinellas County. Unfortunately, I don't have any measurements taken over the last day or two for any other counties that are being impacted on the Gulf Coast. If you know of anybody doing these type of samples, please feel free to share their information with me, and I would love to be able to publish that as well. All right, so the bottom line from satellite images is that Michael made conditions worse for beaches in Pinellas County and the Pinellas County offshore waters. If the winds were to turn westerly, then we would expect a massive fish kill in the Pinellas County area. The good news is, though, that we're not expecting any onshore currents over the next 7 days. So again, what I'm referring to here is this massive, dense area of red tide offshore. If we were to get a westerly wind, it would push all that ashore of Pinellas County. We would have massive fish kill up and down the beaches. But again, I'm not expecting any westerly winds to occur over the next 7 days. So a little bit of good news there. And the same thing goes down, is true down in the Sanibel area, where that dense area of red tide, if we were to get a westerly wind, it would push a lot of that really dense Crania brevis ashore. Sarasota area looks like it's continuing to improve. We'll get more information from the next Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission update on Wednesday. That'll be the next time they release a map, and hopefully by that time it'll be only relevant water samples that were taken after the hurricane. So in that area of Sarasota County, it doesn't look like red tide is completely gone, but it's definitely improving in that area. One little side note, or actually, you know what? I forgot to show you one slide here. I did want to mention the Sanibel area. The bloom offshore of Sanibel Island has shrunk again from 55 miles wide to 30 miles wide. But unfortunately, October and November are the 2 months where the most water is being released from Lake Okeechobee. So that means more nutrients are being released. So despite a little bit of an improvement and shrinking of that offshore bloom, we'll have to watch things closely as we're still putting lots of nutrients out into the Gulf, and that could reverse track and widen a little bit more. Little side note again, I wanted to mention here is crabs. Crabs are busy little bees down on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. They're down there chomping away on the dead and decaying fish and helping to clean it up for us. So they're actually doing a good job down there. With that said, I'm not going to share any personal opinions here, but stone crab season is a big deal here in Florida, and that starts tomorrow. So the fish that have been the crabs that have been consuming the dead and decaying fish, well, those crabs will be available for consumption and sale starting tomorrow. All right, so the forecast, let's take a look at two things. First of all, the Gulf currents and also the wind direction. And again, keep it in mind, we don't want a westerly wind as it would bring these dense blooms ashore. An easterly wind would be a good thing. So today we're looking at an easterly Gulf current. So good news, helping to keep that offshore. Monday we're looking at a a Gulf current blowing from the southeast to the northwest. So the surface blooms will be kind of drifting to the northwest a little bit. So that's okay. We don't want to see any more high density concentrations being pushed to the north, and that could be the case on Monday, but at least it's being kept offshore. Same thing goes for your Tuesday. Same thing goes for Wednesday. And into Thursday, we get currents shifting back from the east to the west again. Again, keeping all of this offshore. If we were to see that westerly push, then that would be some bad news. Saturday, we get a Gulf current that's from the southeast to the northwest. Again, keeping most of the bad the Crania brevis offshore for the most part, or at least the densest part of it. All right, wind direction, that's the other component, and doesn't always match up one-to-one with the Gulf currents. So here's the wind direction forecast for the next couple of days, and this will impact the brevitoxins that become airborne and could make breathing difficult or perhaps improve breathing conditions along our area beaches. And let's go back to Monday here. Here's Monday. We're looking at a predominant easterly wind, which is good. That blows most of the toxins and the irritants offshore. But we do have a little bit of a maybe very slight onshore component during the middle of the afternoon. Otherwise, the morning and the afternoon will be just fine. Same thing goes on Tuesday. We're looking at okay conditions. Wednesday looks mediocre. We could get a bit of a Gulf Sea breeze making its way just onshore of the immediate beach areas on Wednesday, but otherwise a predominant easterly wind during the morning and evening time. On Thursday, it looks good. We'll have a strong easterly wind. And then on Friday, same thing, strong easterly wind. And Saturday, we have kind of mediocre conditions again with a southeasterly wind, maybe a little bit of a Gulf onshore component as well. But again, not a day where we have a westerly wind. So that's really the biggest news to take from this. So over the next 7 days, no major fish kills washing up on area beaches. Yeah, we're going to see some dead fish floating up, but not a massive fish kill. That's because we're not going to have a westerly wind blowing that fish kill or the higher density K-Brev concentrations toward our area beaches. No major respiratory issues. Yeah, there's going to be some brevetoxins in the area at the area beaches, especially if the Gulf sea breeze happens to come on shore a little bit, but no major respiratory issues with a constant onshore breeze. The large bloom should remain offshore for the most part, and let's cross our fingers that continues, as we don't want to see that stuff blowing on shore. So all right guys, that's a look at what's going on right now, what happened after Michael, and what we expect over the next 7 days. Any questions or comments, feel free to mention them below. As always, I appreciate if you like or share these videos, as it really does help to get the word out. So till then, thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.